Tonight, let me tell you the story of the Selkie's knitted shawl, a quiet tale carried by the tide and remembered on a small island where the sea is always close. Imagine the hush of waves folding over stones, the smell of salt in the breeze, and a window glowing faintly with lamplight. Behind the window sat a widow, her hands moving gently as she knitted. Each stitch sounded almost like a tide's heartbeat, soft and steady, as if her needles were listening to the sea outside. She had lost her husband to the waters some years before, and though she no longer wept every night, there was still an emptiness in the room, like a chair waiting for someone who would never return. The villagers spoke kindly of her, saying that she carried her sorrow with dignity, and they often left her skeins of wool as gifts. Yet her truest companion was the sea itself, which sighed through her open window like an old friend. One evening, as the tide pushed higher than usual and the gulls grew silent, she paused, her knitting, and looked out. On her windowsill lay something she had not placed there, a shawl, light as foam, shimmering faintly with droplets. She touched it, expecting it to be cold and damp, but it was warm, almost as if it had been resting on someone's shoulders moments before. The wool was softer than any fleece from the island's sheep, with strands that glistened like threads of seaweed woven with moonlight. She wrapped it around herself, and for the first time in many years, she felt not only warmed but gently steadied, as if the shawl carried the rhythm of the tide within it. The widow wore the shawl when she walked at night along the shore. The stones beneath, her feet no longer felt so sharp, and the wind that once cut against her skin seemed softened. She would pause by tide pools and listen, and in that listening she felt less alone. The islanders noticed her glow returning. "She carries the sea with her now," one fisherman whispered, though he did not mean it unkindly. Rumors spread quickly, as they always do on small coasts, and soon the shawl was thought to be a gift from the Selkies, those seal folk who slip between sea and land, leaving their skins behind when they walk as humans. Children pressed their noses to the window hoping to glimpse the shawl, but the widow guarded it gently, never boastfully, and kept it close to her shoulders on her night walks. In one telling of Selkie lore, these beings come ashore to dance on moonlit sands, shedding their sealskins for a time. If someone hides a Selkie's skin, the creature cannot return to the sea, bound to live as a human until the skin is restored. Many stories carry sorrow, for the Selkie often longs to go back to the waves. Yet there are softer variations too, where the Selkie leaves behind a gift, a token to ease the loneliness of those who dwell always on land. Some say these gifts appear when a person has listened long enough to the sea without demanding anything in return. That may be why the widow, who sat by her window knitting not to conquer her grief but to honor it, found the shawl resting there. It was not stolen, it was given, woven of water and listening. Night after night, she walked with the shawl, and little by little she began to dream differently. Instead of restless dreams of storms and loss, she dreamt of calm seas and distant lights guiding sailors home. Sometimes she heard soft laughter in her sleep, as if seals were playing near her door. She awoke rested, her heart quiet. The shawl did not erase her sorrow, but it seemed to hold it in gentler hands, reminding her that even grief can be softened when shared with the wide world. There is a quiet truth in many coastal tales. The sea takes, but it also gives. Fishermen who lose nets sometimes find driftwood shaped into unlikely beauty. Children who skip stones sometimes find shells polished smooth by years of tumbling. And in this story, a woman who lost a husband found a shawl that carried not answers, but comfort. The tide, with its endless hush, seemed to whisper that gifts may come not when we clutch at them, but when we are willing to sit and listen, open-handed. The islanders came to see her nightly walks as a kind of blessing. Young lovers, anxious about the future, would walk behind her at a distance, claiming that the air felt calmer near her. Old men who had once feared their next voyage said that watching her steady pace gave them courage. Even the children grew quiet when she passed, sensing something gentle, like a lullaby in her steps. She never explained the shawl, never claimed it belonged to a Selkie. But when asked, she would smile and say, "Some threads are given by the sea, some by the heart. I do not always know the difference." As the moon rose higher and the shawl shimmered in its light, the island itself seemed to breathe more slowly. And so this first part of the tale leaves us here, a widow, once lonely, now walking gently along the tide line with a gift she neither expected nor asked for. The sea continues to write its slow letters, and the shawl answers in silence, reminding us that even in solitude, there may be warmth left for us, waiting on a windowsill. In time, the widow's walks became part of the island's rhythm, as steady as the turning of the tide. Lanterns glowed in windows, gulls settled on rocks, and then there she was, a figure wrapped in the shimmering shawl, her steps unhurried, her gaze always soft toward the sea. Some evenings she lingered at the harbor, watching boats sway like cradles. Sailors preparing for journeys noticed how the shawl's threads seemed to ripple though the air was still, as if they carried an unseen tide of their own. They whispered that it was a Selkie's garment, not meant for land at all. Yet no one tried to take it, for to claim it by force would feel like breaking a spell of kindness. On this island, people had learned that not every mystery was to be solved. Some were to be tended like fragile lamps. Children especially loved to hear the theories. At school, they would argue softly about who had left the shawl. One child insisted it was the sea herself, knitting with foamy needles when no one was looking. Another swore it was a seal-maiden who had seen the widow's tears and pitied her. A third claimed the shawl had been woven from cloud, drifted down to rest on the windowsill during a storm. The teacher, who had her own grandmother's stories of Selkies, did not correct them. Instead, she said, "Perhaps all of you are right. Perhaps gifts travel more than one path before they reach our hands." This gentle ambiguity left the children quiet, gazing out at the ocean as though it might reveal its secrets, if only they breathed softly enough. The widow herself did not seek explanations. She wore the shawl because it brought her peace, and in that peace she rediscovered small joys, kneeling to smell wild thyme growing by the cliff, pausing to hear a curlew's cry at dusk, even humming little tunes she thought she had forgotten. Neighbors began to notice that when she spoke, her words were slower, as if shaped by waves rather than haste. She would say things like, "The sea never hurries, yet it returns." These were not lessons exactly, but reminders that even the most restless hearts could learn from water's patience. In one telling from the Orkney Islands, Selkies were thought to be the souls of those lost at sea, returning in seal form to visit their families. When villagers told this version around firesides, they would glance at the widow, wondering quietly if her husband had somehow sent the shawl back to her, a parting kindness across realms. She never confirmed nor denied it, but when asked, she only said, "If comfort comes, do we need to know the exact hand that carried it?" Such words, simple yet luminous, were passed from house to house until they became almost like proverbs. The shawl's story grew beyond her, binding the community with threads of quiet wonder. The investigative side of such tales reveals something important. In harsh coastal life, where storms might swallow boats and loneliness could deepen like winter seas, stories of Selkies offered not only explanation, but balm. To imagine a seal shedding its skin to walk as human was to imagine the barrier between loss and return softened. If the dead could visit as seals, then grief was not final but woven into cycles of tide and moon. The shawl, then, symbolized more than warmth. It was a visible reminder that the world listened, that sorrow could be acknowledged and answered. Anthropologists who later studied these islands noted how myth functioned as an emotional map, pointing not to treasure, but to resilience. By holding the story, the community learned how to hold its grief more gently. One night, a traveling fiddler came to the village inn, and word spread quickly. People gathered for music, bringing bread, ale, and eager hearts. The widow arrived quietly, the shawl draped around her shoulders. As the fiddler played, the notes wove through the rafters like threads of starlight. Listeners swore that the widow's shawl shimmered more brightly with every tune, its fibers catching and releasing light like the sea at dawn. When the last song faded, the fiddler bowed to her and said, "That garment holds more music than my strings." She only smiled, but her smile carried through the room like another melody, softening even the silence. Later, alone on the path home, she paused by the shore. The moon shone wide, and she thought she saw shapes moving in the surf. Seals rolling, diving, their sleek heads glistening. One lifted its gaze toward her. For a breath, she felt sure she was seen not as a distant human but as a companion, part of the same story. Then the seal slipped, beneath the waves. She touched the shawl in gratitude, not for answers, but for presence. It was enough to know that in some invisible way, the sea and she belonged to each other. And so the island grew quieter at night, not from fear, but from reverence. People closed their shutters gently, as though not to disturb the rhythm of the widow's steps. They spoke less loudly, laughed more softly, trusting that peace was contagious. The shawl had become less an object than a symbol, a woven reminder that even in hardship, one could walk slowly and still feel held. The sea's hush became the village's hush, and together they formed a lullaby that needed no words. This part of the tale closes with the widow pausing on the cliff, looking out over the wide, dark water. Her shawl glows faintly, her breath steady, her sorrow tender but no longer sharp. Below, waves move like pages turning. Above, stars scatter like forgotten stitches across the night sky. In her stillness, the island itself seems to rest, as though comfort has seeped into its stones. And for those who hear this story, it whispers, too. Some gifts are not explanations, but gentle companions, asking only to be carried with care. Seasons passed, and the shawl remained, its threads never fraying, its color never fading. Villagers sometimes joked that it was the only garment on the island untouched by salt and wear, though they always spoke with respect. In winter, when winds roared and doors rattled, the widow would wrap it tightly and sit by her window, knitting as always. Those who visited said the room felt warmer than any hearth. In summer, when tourists arrived on small boats, they too noticed her presence. A gentle figure on the headland, shawl flowing like a tide-bound banner. Some thought she was a lighthouse keeper's widow. Some thought she was a storyteller. Whatever their guesses, they lowered their voices, sensing the place was not for loudness, but for reverence. On quiet nights, she still walked the shoreline, and sometimes children, older now, joined her. They asked whether she thought the shawl was from a Selkie. She would answer in her steady way, "Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is from the sea. Perhaps it is from listening." Then she would add, "When you carry something with care, it becomes part of you, no matter its origin." The children, who loved stories but also trusted her wisdom, carried those words with them like small lanterns in their hearts. Years later, when they grew into sailors, fishers, and mothers of their own, they would repeat her sentences as quietly as she had spoken them. There is a Scottish tale that says Selkies sometimes leave behind shawls, cloaks, or veils as tokens of unfinished journeys. If a human finds one, they are invited into a bond with the sea, not of ownership, but of kinship. Scholars have suggested that these stories offered islanders a way to speak of longing, of the desire to be both at home and elsewhere, both human and something more. The widow's shawl, then, may be read as a symbol of belonging to two worlds. Her sorrow kept her tied to the sea, yet her walks brought her closer to land, community, and quiet life. By wearing the shawl, she became a bridge between solitude and fellowship, between grief and peace. One evening, long after the shawl first appeared, she dreamed of her husband. He did not speak. He only smiled, standing on a shore where waves curled softly. He lifted his hand in farewell, but it was not a farewell of loss. It was more like a benediction. When she woke, she placed her hand on the shawl and felt that the dream was not a wound, but a healing. She told no one, yet from that morning on, her walk seemed lighter, her steps more like a dance. Villagers said she glowed as if carrying dawn around her shoulders. And perhaps she was, for dawn is nothing more than light returning to a place that thought it was only night. Years later still, when she was very old and her hands shook too much to knit, she folded the shawl carefully and placed it back on her windowsill. Neighbors noticed it one morning, shimmering with dew as if it had just arrived again. By evening, it was gone. No one saw who took it, or whether it dissolved back into the sea breeze. But the widow, resting in her chair, smiled with eyes closed, as though content that the gift had completed its circle. The sea, always patient, had called it home. Even after she passed, her story lingered. Islanders told of the woman who carried comfort in a Selkie's shawl, who taught that listening could be a form of prayer, and that gifts sometimes arrive when we do not seek them. The beach near her home became known for its hush, travelers pausing there to breathe slowly, as though expecting to feel a shawl's weight across their shoulders. And perhaps some did, for the mind, when calmed, often finds what it most needs. The island's children grew up calling that stretch of coast the Widow's Walk, and even outsiders sensed the name was not about sadness, but about quiet resilience. And so the myth continues, carried in waves and retellings. In one version, the shawl still moves from home to home, appearing on other windowsills when loneliness grows too heavy. In another, the Selkie herself is said to have taken it back, wearing it again as she swam, carrying a trace of human warmth into the ocean depths. In yet another, the shawl is invisible now, but its presence is felt in the hush that spreads across the island at dusk. Each version differs, but all agree on one truth. Comfort arrives when we meet the world with open hands. Tonight, as you listen, imagine the shawl folded gently, the sea beyond steady, the gulls settling, and the tide writing its endless letters. Imagine, too, the soft fiddle drones and the hum of waves, guiding you not toward restless storms, but toward calm. The Selkie's knitted shawl is less about magic to control and more about magic to receive, the kind that steadies the heart, eases the breath, and reminds us that the world can hold us gently. Just as the widow found her steps softened, so too may yours as you drift into rest. So let this story settle around you like a shawl of its own, salt-scented, moonlit, and kind. Let it remind you that even in loneliness, the sea listens, the night comforts, and unseen companions walk quietly at your side. May your dreams tonight be like calm tides, your worries folded away like wool at rest. And as always, thank you for joining this journey of myth and memory. If you wish to hear more stories of gentle gods, quiet spirits, and the soft lessons carried by time, do remember to subscribe so the next tale may find you easily. For now, close your eyes, breathe with the tide, and good night.